So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists. I'm going to be moderating. My name is Clark. I am associate pastor at First Baptist Church up in San Francisco. I'm half Korean, if you're wondering why they put a white guy up here. But as an associate pastor, I oversee our family and youth. I have not worked directly in youth ministry since about 2018. And so while I am still adjacent, I'm looking forward to learning from this panel as well, from our panelists, on some of these emerging issues. So next up, we have Ervin Liang, who's the student pastor here at Living Hope Community Church. We got Terrence Shay, who's the family pastor at FCBC Walnuts. We have Kevin Yee, whoever this fool is now. My good friend Kevin, who is the, I always forget your title, college and young adults pastor at Church Everything. Clearly, we're like best friends. We literally are, but I always forget his title.
Clark Fobes, right?
Clark Fobes, yes. Kevin's also like a Hollywood producer, if you didn't know, so be on the lookout for him. Gower Lee, who I just had the pleasure of meeting, who's a professional counselor and the director of counseling ministries at New Life Presbyterian Church in Fullerton. And then Monica Kim, Danny's amazing better half, who is a PhD in counseling and psychology, works with CCEF out in Philly. Can you remind me what the letters stand for? I always forget that.
Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation.
Thank you. I would have totally butchered that. I'm glad I asked. And then last but not least, Chris Lee, who we go way back to his UCR days. Chris is the high school pastor?
Yeah.
High school pastor at Mariners Church down in Irvine. So we obviously have a lot of people up here, so we're gonna try to get through these questions in a way. We also want to give you guys some more time to discuss at your tables after the fact to help us process, because I think one of the amazing things about doing this with an Asian-specific crowd is, if you've been to a youth ministry or any ministry conference before, often I always had to take 1, 2, 3 days to decompress and recontextualize everything I gleaned into my ministry. Well, the amazing and unique thing is we don't have to take that extra time to recontextualize. It's being contextualized, and so now at your very tables, you can start to ask, how does this apply in your very context where you're serving? So just the first question we'll throw out this question that we discuss at our tables to all the panelists. What do you guys see as some of the trends you're seeing in Gen Z and Gen Alpha that are emerging issues, and specifically as they impact Asian American youth? Do I need to call on someone so we don't have all this Asian deference, waiting around? Everyone's pointing the mics to the women.
I'll start. Not. Yeah. Oh, okay. I can start. One of the things that I think is something that I feel like is affecting our youth right now is the issue of vulnerability. What I mean by that is our students have bifurcated lives. They have a life that they live online, and they have a life that they live in person. And I think in person they crave vulnerability, but then online they're taught essentially how not to be vulnerable. And I think sometimes it's exacerbated in our cultural context because of shame. This idea that we have to appear like everything's okay. And I know that what they experience online and what they're told online about what life is supposed to be like, we know that rates of depression, rates of mental health issues have skyrocketed in the last 10 years because of social media and those kinds of things. And the idea is that, but there's, I feel like, more pressure for our students to act like everything's okay. And I do think that that's something that we're facing more in this emerging decade than we're going to be in the past. And I think that one of the things we have to be conscious of is this idea that our cultural heritage almost pushes us a little bit more in that direction of making it look like everything's okay all the time. And so as youth workers, youth pastors, we have to learn how to get underneath that. And I do think that the ways in which our youth groups are held together, the programs that we do, the discipleship methods that we have, all of those things, I think, that as we are rolling forward in the next couple of years, we're gonna have to start having serious conversations about how we then bend the methods to address these needs that we have in terms of helping and shaping our students to be more vulnerable, especially in person. So I think that's going to be something. Yes.
Just to build on what Kevin has shared, I actually also am seeing that there is a public-facing vulnerability, and then there is a private vulnerability, meaning that I see often even in the students that I'm ministering to where they are incredibly quiet, but I know there are a lot of thoughts, and sometimes those thoughts are only shared in Discord. They're only shared via Snapchat, where there's a lot of raw vulnerability. And then you have this other side of vulnerability where they are vlogging or, and then they are in tears over something that has happened, and then they share that publicly. But it's not maybe in its fullness, but there's definitely a lot there. And I think when you are a young person and you're trying to navigate social media and you're trying to navigate this world of vulnerability and intimacy that's being created through chat rooms, it leads to a very kind of stilted communication in real life and in the way that they're actually navigating real life. And so I, instead of seeing it as, yes, it's definitely problematic because I think it leads to like dual lives being lived. You're not quite sure which person or identity that you are trying to take hold of. But I also think it's ripe for conversation. It is a way for us to be able to ask, okay, so what prompts you to be vulnerable in like a Discord chat? And why is that? That's something that it feels so hard to do within the context of church community. When in church community, we should be the most vulnerable because we know that we can be vulnerable before God, and we know that in Christ He actually receives us. And those are the gospel truths that we want to make real for our students, but I think so often they don't know how to grasp onto those things. So I wonder if it's just a way for us to actually enrich their lives even more with gospel truth. It's just a matter of actually bringing those things to the surface as we are talking to them and meeting with them in our ministries.
That's a really great point. I think when I think about that, some of the conversations that I've had with students in those spaces where they finally like come up to me, they want to schedule a call or a meeting or whatever, I'm realizing that when I bring those questions into my preaching, that's actually some of my most important times, because they're like, oh yeah, I have that same question that student had who finally mustered up enough courage to actually ask you, and they like really lean in those moments. So they definitely are thinking and feeling so much of this, but it's hard for them to like ask the big question or to open themselves up. And it's so weird because there's even this like, I think you're kind of talking about it, but if you think about like Instagram to like TikTok, it's like Instagram's like super polished, right? So it's like you want this like really nice thing, and then TikTok and BeReal's like blah, right? It's like whatever, right? And so it's still very curated and intentional, like the vulnerability scene, and you can't tell if something's always staged or not. But that's how like vulnerability has a unique currency. And sometimes when they do it, you're like, oh, that's it. But there's more underneath. It's just such a weird currency that we need to also kind of dance around. Yeah.
Go a different direction. Excuse me. I work with primarily third-gen Korean American students here at Living Hope. And I've noticed this thing called bulldozer parenting. So, which is different than helicopter parenting, which is different than latchkey or immigrant parenting. I'm the son of Chinese immigrants, and so I just didn't really see my mom and my dad that much. So much so that after my brother was born, we were shipped to China to go be raised by our grandparents. So my parents loved us. Anyways, so one of the things that I noticed for our students at Living Hope is, man, like their parents are second gen, so which means they were raised by immigrant parents. And they had to essentially raise themselves, and the hardships that they experience in that, they do not want to pass on to their kids. And so instead, sometimes that comes across as like helicopter parenting. I'm going to look and see everything that you're doing. But what I'm starting to see in our youth ministry is bulldozer parenting in the sense of, hey, I have paved out the path for you. I'm giving you every single resource you could possibly need. Follow this pathway that I've set out for you, and you'll be good, right? And so what that inexplicably does for the kid is, well, things are convenient, things are easy, things are fun, most of the times, I guess, and things are always like busy. So then that means for the student, their interpretation of all that is slow is bad, boring is bad, hard is bad. But we all know that slowing is part of spiritual transformation. We all know that hardship is part of spiritual transformation. And so I think these things as Asian Americans kind of come into wealth and aren't immigrants anymore, and the loving heart and desire from a parent to a kid of wanting to make their kid's life better is great. Obviously, it comes from a great place, but the ramifications of it does play out in how we do youth ministry, so.
I think this generation is very anxious. Is this on? Check. I think this generation is very anxious. They're worried about a lot of things. I think it was Kara Powell that spoke about 3 big questions, right? Who are you? Who cares about you? And why are you here? And these are huge questions that the gospel has answers to, and not just barely satisfying answers, actually fully, comprehensively satisfying answers. But a lot of times, it doesn't necessarily reach into the hearts of our students because they're anxious about a lot of things, and they feel, even though maybe like what Ervin's saying, that the road is paved out for them, but they're uncertain of themselves. They're uncertain of what people think of them. They're wondering if they're measuring up to others, and that's really hard.
Yeah. Maybe to kind of shift us into our next related question, how can our Asian American churches uniquely address these trends? And I want to pick on Monica. No, start off with Monica as our biblical counselor. All these things that we've talked about, I think there's really great emerging issues. Bulldozer parent, I see that so much in the parents and kids of my church. Anxiety, vulnerability. Monica, as you minister, and you guys can answer this too, but as you minister to clients, I'm curious if there are ways you feel that your Asian heritage, or even as you're ministering and counseling, that the Asian church really can address some of these issues in a unique way. You don't have to divulge anything, because I know client privilege.
I'm just thinking about all of these issues. You may all be like me. I don't know. Maybe you're wondering, what does vulnerability mean? Yeah, what are we actually talking about? Vulnerability? Is it being more honest, authentic, opening a lot of things up? A lot of anxiety, a lot of shame. It's kind of like everything from the past too. So, but I guess what I wanted to add on to that is that it's also quite amplified. That they all that was mentioned seem pretty similar to a lot of the things that we may have experienced, but as Kevin said, it's so amplified in light of social media and the peer interactions that are going on, all of that. I've also seen a lot of students where they'll come in, talk more about also racism too, that's still there. Even though they may be, I don't know if they may be talking about it at church or not, but I know that for me, when they come in, they do talk about it, especially opening that avenue up and being able to say, hey, is this also happening? Tell me about it. And then there's actually so many layers then they're going on about their experiences at school. So I just wanted to add that that's also still happening. And in fact, the CDC report for 2023 had identified that 57% of Asian students, high school students, just high school students, were expressing and reporting that they experience a lot of racism at school. A lot of bullying is also really intense too. So those things are on the table. And then I suppose, just going to what you had mentioned in terms of then what would I suggest. So those are additions. And then as someone in the church, I think in my experience of youth ministry too, I think the most important kind of way of, while there's the greatest hope in Christ and the living hope we have, how the church, the youth ministry really cares authentically and repetitively about all of the things that they go through. That's really important. I think teenagers now have a lot more, I think, awareness of, and we'll say it, Asian American teenagers too, whether you really are authentic and whether you really deeply, compassionately care. And if a ministry can do that in multiple kind of ways to make it a safe haven, I think that will go a long way. I know I'm not saying anything practical in terms of just the big picture right now, but I think that could be so important as you incarnate Christ in the ministry as a place that's safe, even more so because of the increasing intense struggles.
When I first got to Mariners, I would reach out to students, and kind of going off of this, one of the students responded and was like, "Hey, are you Asian?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I had an idea because the student I was texting last name and stuff, right? So I'm like, I kind of knew that the student was Asian too. And then the student responded and was like, "Oh my gosh, wait, do you work here now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And the student was so excited just to know that there was another one of us there. And honestly, through that, it's been so fun because just the one. Just kidding. But so many more students have come up to me. I think just out of our background understanding, they feel so like just that I could resonate with them as I share my story and as I talk with them. And what's come out of some of that is I don't think I've thought more about my culture than when I left it predominantly Asian American church, and I started thinking about it so much. And I was like, man, is it my introversion? Is it my Asianness? I don't know. I can't tell. And so I'm processing all this too. And I think going there, I'm realizing so many students, like you mentioned, they're processing a lot of this too because they're Asian and maybe not their whole school is Asian, or sometimes their whole school is Asian, but their church or their volleyball team, whatever else, right? And so they're trying to navigate how does culture impact me and what does it say about me? But it's also been so fascinating because some of the Christian club presidents that we have at our church, I can think of 4 Christian club presidents. They're all Asian. They're all Asian American. And there's something... College apps, baby. That's what we're talking about. Whatever it takes, right? But it's yeah, all that's there. So last year we had a student. She's the president at Uni High School, one of the top high schools in Irvine. She's Chinese American. We shared her story because she organized with Decision Point this huge outreach event, and she invited our senior pastor to go. I had a day and all that, and we shared her story. And then out of that, so many other students saw that, and not just Asian students, but so many students saw that, and they were so encouraged because she's like, I'm an introvert. I'm more shy. But I want to organize something like this, and so I do think. I've been also thinking a lot about the African American church, Black church, and the way that they do story, I think, is so helpful. And so when students see another student doing something, or they get the vision of something, that's so much we try to do as pastors and leaders. We give them a vision, and we're trying to say hey, what if you tried this? God is calling you to do. What if you did that, right? And so much of our leadership is calling out something we see in them and giving them the confidence to do that. And as students share their story, and it speaks into all the vulnerability, all of this stuff. It's so powerful because they see God work in the life of that student. They're like, I look like that, or man, that resonates with me too. Man, what if God did that in my life? I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, I think one of the things that, as I've learned to kind of discover and go through the history of my own Asian Americanness, one of the things that has been really powerful for me over the last half decade or so has been recognizing that the Old Testament comes alive when we understand our own ethnic heritage and start to see that in Scripture. For me, the Old Testament is the primary example of the places that I go to help our students better understand our story. Like, what is our story, right? Think about someone like Moses, right? Moses grew up in Egypt, right? He's not an Egyptian, he's an Hebrew. 40 years was trained under the Egyptian practices, rules, and all those things, had the best education possible, and basically the way God uses that is not for Egypt's benefit, but for the Hebrews. And I think the story for our students and the story for ourselves too is to understand that this sort of perpetual foreigner existence that we have, I do believe that God is using that for a particular reason and a purpose. But if we don't believe that story, we will never believe that our ethnicity, our Asianness matters, right? We'll always think it's a liability versus an advantage. You know, how many of the Old Testament saints were people that were sent somewhere else, right? And how much of the Israelite heritage and the Israelite culture was something that they were supposed to move with them everywhere they went, you know? I'm preaching on Joseph right now. Joseph was in prison for 11 to 15 years, right? And the idea is he still had a belief in God. When he was in a foreign country, did not have access to church, right? Like how is it that he was able to have faith in God? And the idea is that there's these things that God is doing in these people that apply to us today. And so I think for us to emphasize that, we can tell those stories in a way that other people in the United States can't. And so in that sense, we actually have a lot in common with the Black church. And I wish we would lean into that more because those are the stories that we can tell. We just have to be able to see that for ourselves.
Should we write ourselves into the story like Severance with Asian faces on Old Testament children's books? Anyone watch Severance in here? Okay, never mind. That's super hip and relevant, guys. Come on.
I think I'm hearing a couple of things. I'm hearing the story of so many of both all of us in the room as well as the students that we serve that may actually confront their otherness, right, when they are just working through daily life on campus. But I am also seeing as a trend, as we're talking about, and because I have 3 kids at home. They're all teenagers. I have 2 high schoolers and a middle schooler. My middle son, who's the high schooler, and my younger daughter go to one school, which is predominantly Asian. Actually, it's across town. And then my other daughter goes to our neighborhood school, which is more, so my other 2 go to a magnet school, and then my oldest daughter just goes to your traditional high school, and it's predominantly white. And they're having very different experiences. And what I'm seeing is that with my my son and my younger daughter, being Asian is perfectly acceptable and fine because they are actually mainstream culture at their school. So they're not butting up against racial inequities and, or biases or prejudice. While my oldest daughter, she posted photos from her youth retreat, and we go to a predominantly Korean American church with families that are second-generation parents, third-generation kids, and she had all of her Asian friends on a story, and then her friend DM'd her and said, "What is this? Chink after chink after chink." And so it's interesting because what I'm seeing in our churches now is that we have students that are going to schools and communities where it's predominantly Asian American, and that might actually not be their reality, understanding what it means to be considered a foreigner. They haven't reached that yet. It doesn't mean that they're not going to reach it ever. It's just that it hasn't happened for them yet because their world is smaller, like my 2 younger children. But for my daughter, she's seeing it in real time. And when I've asked her, "What do you think about this?" She's like, I don't know what to think about this. I just know that I don't want him bothering me at school, so I'm not going to bring it up because I don't want to be the narc that brings this up when I'm already a minority at school, and then you just have a target on your back. And so I guess I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but I think my question for all of you then is to how can we then reconsider the ways in which our students are now navigating life? Because I was just talking with someone about this earlier when Hanley was speaking, is that I have never been in a situation before where being Korean was cool when I was growing up. It still is confounding to me that you can have K-pop superstars then doing collabs with like Bruno Mars and having it heard in the mall. Like, it is just so strange. Or when people are like, oh, I had Korean barbecue the other day. I'm like, really? Because even though it's so accepted now, for me, it was such a source of shame. And so you have, and I see that my oldest daughter is still navigating the same type of things, the same hang-ups that I am. And then my other two children just think it's bizarre that their oldest sister is going through something like that. So I think it just presents us a unique challenge. How can we then bring these things to light? Because this is everyday life for our students, and yet still be able to say God is sovereign over these things, and it gives us an opportunity to, one, connect to our Savior even more, who understands what it feels like to be outcast and exiled and humiliated, because that's how he entered into our existence. And at the same time, to be able to say, how can we have compassion for those who are experiencing those things? So I think this is just a way for us to kind of open up the dialogue a little bit more, because what I'm finding is that, our students it's not just this immigrant reality so much anymore. It's evolving is what I'm seeing. But there's just so many layers that come with it, so it just adds another layer of complexity.
Maybe as we go to this final question, you guys can keep thinking about how our churches can address those trends uniquely, but also maybe to kind of follow up Gower's point, how can we disciple Asian American teens in light of some of these issues? And so I think something that I'm seeing a lot more today is the talks on race and ethnicity are not taboo anymore. In fact, they're almost necessary to thread into our discipleship. I think that's a good thing. I think how we address it is the important matter. But even things like mental health, anxiety, vulnerability, bulldozing parents, how do we disciple students as the whole church too? Maybe Terrence, you want to speak to that, but in a way that addresses some of these emerging issues.
Today, my church brought a group, and the group that they brought, the group that they are, is intergenerational, from high school students all the way up to a grandmother. And it's not to say that that's not in your churches. Actually, all these people are. But I think one of the ways by which we push back on maybe a cultural narrative or a shame-based narrative or an externally based narrative is actually diving into who we are spiritually, that we truly are meant to be and saved to be, and being sanctified within an intergenerational spiritual family. I don't think we lean into that enough. I think sometimes we settle just to be coexisting when we actually could push into and lean into it so that you're walking together, because what binds you together will last for eternity across generations, across cultures, and especially in a particular church family. These are your brothers and sisters. You might come from different walks of life. You might come from different experiences, different feelings, but what binds you and what brings you together is God, and that's powerful, and that's supernatural. And so I would make that the first thing to think about, is not creating something new, although there could be helpful ways to think about this, but it's to lean into the fact that we are family in Christ, and that every local church is meant to be that experience and that vehicle of growth for you to be able to live that and realize that and be able to pour into that.
And arguably, could we say the Asian churches know how to do that maybe better than most others?
We are definitely more communal. You hear the uncle and auntie references probably a little bit more often, and I don't think we take that for granted. There's a natural sense of reverence amongst generations and connections. It's like, a child is your child, not just because they actually are your child, but because you're in the same church. So definitely.
I would just add on, whether you're a youth leader or a pastor, but be around long enough to see the change. I know you gave a seminar on longevity. Like, what is your why? Don't forget your why. Why did you join youth ministry to begin with? How did you get in to begin with? Because, man, youth ministry is so hard. There are some days you get a parent email and you're like, I'm done, you know. Some days you finish youth group and you're driving down and you're like, wow, working at Burger King sounds pretty nice right now, you know. And, I mean, it's just really real, right? It's very real. But on those moments when if you forget your why, then, yeah, you'll leave. So be around long enough to see the change. And at the same time, I will say, you know, man, this is my first time working in an Asian American or Asian church setting. And so I have been learning and drinking out of a fire hose in my experience here. And one of the things that I found to be so discouraging when I got here was not seeing more people like Danny Kwan, who've been in youth ministry for 29 years at the same church. And yet when I go to hang out with Chris at Mariners, and we have some mutual friends that have been in youth ministry for 20 years, 30 years. And one of Chris's mentors even been in youth ministry for 40 years, you know, and how come we can't find that in the Asian American church experience? There's a systemic issue, you know, somewhere within that, and encourage your pastors, advocate for your pastors to the elder board, to the deacons, or however your church hierarchy goes. You know, it's okay to be annoying as volunteers to the church leadership. Be like, hey, our youth ministry's moving. Like, come on, we need help, you know. I think just youth ministry is hard, and these issues won't be addressed as fast or as carefully or as detailed if you're just swapping out volunteers and pastors all the time. So.
Just want to add one, I guess, aspect to a trend with Gen Alpha and Gen Zs that maybe could be important. I think, and maybe you all heard about it in certain workshops, but biblical literacy, if I'm thinking about discipleship in the church, in terms of this generation and the next, and the challenges of really knowing Scripture well and having a sense of biblical, you know, literacy. I think about my own, I guess they're young adults right now, but they did grow up with, in the church, they're Gen Zs, but sometimes I wonder, do you guys know the Bible? They do. You know, they've been taught, but in terms of actually then on the ground, how does it apply to my life specifically? Not just knowing information about the Bible, but real discipleship. I do think that could be an important part. Not in terms of like more, you know, Bible studies, more, you know, I don't know, memorization, and more, but really authentic, walking together kind of ministry that talks about life in Scripture in a deep way. How that can be fostered obviously can look like multifold in many different kind of ways. But I don't know if you can do mentorship kind of ways, but I think that could be a really important part of ministering to the Gen Alphas and, you know, moving forward.
Building on Monica's point, a lot of our Asian American churches, we do bend towards having students who do really well in school. The majority of my youth ministry, the high school students I work with, most of them had, and were taking from 9th grade all the way to 10th grade, at least 3-4 AP classes. Like, that was normal. And so my teaching, if I'm perfectly honest, if it's not matching that level, then I feel like I'm doing them a disservice. This occurred to me a couple years in, that I realized, like, they're learning like AP bio, and if the Bible lessons we're giving them is Jesus told a small man in a tree to come down so he can go to his house. And so you need to be welcoming to small people at your, you know, whatever. Like if that's what they're getting.
You mean other Asians?
Yeah, it's no wonder that our students go to.
I'm sorry. I'm small too, okay?
That's racist, dude. Man. Cancel Clark Fobes. Okay. But the idea is, no wonder they would graduate from our youth ministry is go to college and not take Christianity seriously, right? Because so much of what they're learning in their math, science, history, whatever. And so I think it's important for us to realize, if they're taking AP Lit, then they're analyzing the Old Testament and the New Testament at a college level from a literary standpoint. Can we do that for our students? Can we help them understand that the Bible is incredibly beautiful as a literary work of art? And if we can't get there with them, then we shouldn't be surprised that they walk away from the faith or that they think that the Bible is a joke, right? So we have to do the work to do that. And if I'm honest, Asian American youth workers in particular, we have an incredible advantage in that the way a lot of our churches are shaped. And this is what I found. It doesn't matter whether it's first gen or second gen. We run our own Sunday services, right? Like that's not true of most of the rest of the country. It's normal for us because it started with the language barrier, and that became a cultural phenomenon, and that just keeps going, because what I've discovered is a lot of second-gen churches where there is no language barrier, you still have their own service, right? But that means that we can do that on their level in a way that's appropriate to them, but we have to be thinking about, okay, these guys are taking college prep classes. Does my teaching live up to that standard? Because if it doesn't, then we shouldn't be surprised when they leave. So I think that's part of the work that we have to do, but also take that up as a challenge. And I think our students, they'll respect that more because, again, they want that. They know that the level that they're getting in school, if it's higher than what they're getting at church, they're just going to look down on it. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that too.
I think to add to that too, the advantage is, I said this in my workshop, Asian churches tend to be the most well-educated pastorally, whereas non-Asian, usually majority white churches, their youth person is not going to have a Master of Divinity or a seminary degree. Almost every Asian youth pastor I know has some form of higher level theological training and education. And so we already have the equipping to do that. So why not use it, you know?
Yeah, start teaching in Greek, guys. What are you doing?
That's
no,
so
don't.
Good.
I failed all my language classes. I can barely speak Korean. We want me to speak Hebrew and Greek now? No, thank you.
I think the other, on the flip side, I think that's so important. I think I went a lot of years fooling myself, thinking that me growing my knowledge in theology was me maturing, when, of course, academically and biblically, hermeneutically, we do the work. But at the same time, like, I think we also need to do the work in our own lives. And I know so many youth pastors who blow up their lives and, man, like, they go sideways. And, like, how are you going to help a student figure out their porn addiction if you can't and you're addicted yourself? And so, like, the work as pastors and leaders, like, we're not just up there spouting information to them. Like, we're modeling it with our lives, and they can tell, like, if they share about lust and you're like, oh, like, me too, you know, like, they're like, okay, so, like, I guess, am I just trapped in this, you know? And so, like, I think we do need to do the work, the hard work in our lives to inspire them and give them hope that transformation can actually happen. And that should come out of this, like, joy, I think. I think that's another thing that we can give to this generation, that, like, life with Jesus is the best, and he can actually change your life. He can set you free from addiction. It's beautiful. It's broken too, and we're broken, and it's messy. But there is this, like, joy and inspiration, I think, that we can give to them. Not like this, like, I can go into, like, sad, mopey Eeyore Chris at times, you know, and, like, that's not gonna help them love Jesus more and know him more. And then, so do the work, give them hope. And lastly, real quick, I think equipping them is so huge too, because I think they don't always want to see another adult talk at them because they have so much education. They want to try this stuff. And man, like, even I think about some of the students that I've had here that are thinking about going to ministry, want to go into ministry, counseling, something like that. Man, like, when you let them try stuff, and hey, what if you did a spoken word thing? What if you did a rap? What if you made a video? What if you started posting started a Bible study? Like, you start planting those ideas in their minds, and they're like, because to get to somewhere new, they have to try something new, and sometimes they're kind of scared to do that. But equipping I also did so much ministry out of I I came in with the mentality of, I wonder what people are going to think what I teach. I wonder what people are going to think about me. Did I do a good job? But our job, Ephesians 4 says we're called to equip the saints. So what does it look like to let go of my teaching, share the stage, they start in the video, they do the planning, they do the stuff, and then it's like, wait, then what am I going to do? You got to like correct their, you don't want heresy, right? You don't want like these other things. And there's stuff that we can do as we come alongside. And I've seen some of the best ministry and discipleship happen through that. And some of the youth pastors, the Asian youth pastors that I talk to probably the most about is, how are you engaging in students? How are you getting the faith real in their lives? And so much of that comes out of them practically serving and trying and creating and connecting and building relationships. And out of that serving push, I actually think it's not just effective, but it's biblical. It's our call not to make all of it about ourselves, but decentralizing that and giving them the power and creativity, letting them be honest, letting them critique my sermons. Like it can be really painful and hard and scary. Like, are they going to show up on time? They flaked out last time. I don't know, right? And so it's really like believing in them and letting them do it. But I think it's such a beautiful thing.
They don't have MDivs. They're not allowed to critique.
They don't know Greek.
No, that is, yeah. Neither do I, so it's okay. Such a good point. I will say, like, the heart, the joy, is really, really super important. So I'm thankful that you added that on top of what I said.
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in empowering our students. I mean, that's why our students are here this morning doing praise, and we have students serving on Wednesday nights in our junior high ministry. So our high schoolers, they would serve on a Wednesday night to help, mentor our junior hires. And I love it because they then come to me, and then they also go to their actual high school small group leader and apologize to their small group leader. They're like, wow, you put up with a lot when I was in middle school, and you're probably still putting up with a lot while I'm in high school, right? But in this whole process of student leadership and student empowerment, there's this phrase where it's like, if I can see it, I can aim for it, right? And so just cycling back to what Chris said about stories and platforming students, man, other students then can start seeing that, and now they can aim for it. And at the end of the day, like, isn't living with Jesus living a life that's bigger than ourselves? Living in a grander way, because that's just who Jesus is, and he's always calling us to take steps of faith forward. And so as we empower students and equip them, they start entering into a grander life than they could have even imagined for themselves. And I think that's the heart of youth ministry, where we say, through showing up each week, I believe in you probably more than you believe in yourself, and I'm trying to push you into that version of you that is closely following Jesus into the life that he has for you. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap it up and give you guys some time to talk at your tables. But just if I could kind of summarize, I think what I'm kind of gathering from you guys, and as I'm hearing, I think the general refrain has been, discipling teens today actually needs to raise the bar, not lower it. And on all fronts, like raise the bar on seeing the depth of Scripture and what it calls us to. Raise the bar in calling students into a life of holiness and following Christ, raising the bar in how we call students to join in, not just be spectators and consumers. I think all of this, too, it just reminds me of something that one of my favorite thinkers today is Mark Sayers. He is a pastor out in Melbourne, Australia. And as I've read him and listened to him, one of the things he said is that as we move forward into post-Christian generation, in the current trends and how the church should respond, one of the things he says is that the church needs to learn how to interact in culture as a creative minority, no longer being in seats of power, no longer being the big influencers. Already when I heard him say that a while ago, it got my mind thinking like, well, who are the literal minorities that are already learning to do that and have a whole history of doing that through immigrant churches? But another thing he said was that in order for us to press forward and represent Christ with a humble but powerful witness, it's going to look a lot more, not big and flashy, not loud, but it's actually going to look a lot more humble and quiet and more thoughtful and reserved. And it's going to look a lot smaller and grow from those marginal spaces. When I think about those two things together, I can't help but think that is literally, quite literally, the Asian church. because who else has learned to work from the margins of society, from quiet places, not having power in society, not being big and flashy? It is the Asian and the Asian American church. And that gives me so much hope, because as we think about reaching the next generation, I honestly believe the answer to reaching the next generation for Christ resides within the Asian church. For a number of reasons, but even quite simply for those two things that Mark Sayers said. So I want to give you guys some time now at your tables to answer these questions that we just talked about. What are some ways you can disciple Asian American teens in light of these emerging issues, and how can your Asian churches uniquely address them? So we'll give you guys, again, about 7 minutes or so to discuss at your tables before we wrap up with our final session.